about being in a room with 15,000 people and smiling for 2 hours and kind of getting swept up in the whole thing, like really wanting to be friends with Chris Martin, singing Fix You and singing Yellow, and kind of just getting lost in the whole thing. And somehow I walked out of this Coldplay concert committed to these two ideas. And the first was that we're going to make some t-shirts, and we're going to sell these t-shirts to raise money for Renee's treatment. And the t-shirts were going to be black, and that was because the band was wearing black at the time. And the words, the funny words, were going to be white, and that was because their shoes were white at the time. And so it was very deep stuff that this was all. And then like kind of the last idea was just to, with the t-shirts, was to put the story on the inside, just to print the story kind of quietly on the inside so that people could share it, find it. Maybe it could somehow be more than a t-shirt. And the other idea, the second idea, was related to the internet, and it was related to this kind of alternate universe that was starting to happen online. And I'm older than most of you guys, but if some of you can remember back to 2006, this thing was happening on the internet, and people were talking about the top 8, and it was significant. Like where you were, you didn't want to be 9th because that was like oblivion. And there was this guy named Tom, and he apparently was really important, but he had a terrible default picture. And so this was the moment of MySpace. And a couple weeks later, everyone was on there, and a couple years later, no one was on there. And no one has seen Tom. Like, it was okay. I think we got paid, hopefully. So. But joke, actually, one funny side note. I was telling this story a few weeks ago, and this girl was really offended, and she spoke up from like the back, and she spoke up and she said, "I'm on there." And I was so intrigued. I was like, who does she talk to? If you're on there, go for it and find her.
I saw that,
Where my head was at, like joking aside, the idea was just to give the story a home. And just to try to give the story a home where people could find it and share it and interact with it maybe. And where everything changed was this first box of t-shirts showed up at a friend's concert, and I had gotten to know the guys that play in one of my favorite bands, and I had known these guys for years leading up to this, and basically that was because they were surfers and I worked at Quicksilver, and I had access to free clothes, and I hoped that they would like me if I gave them free clothes. And so I got to know the guys in this band Switchfoot in San Diego. And 2006 was a huge year for my friends. They had a song called Meant to Live that was on the radio at the time. It came off an album called Beautiful Letdown, and it sold 3 million copies. So it was just this enormous time for my friends. And because of that, they're in town in South Florida to play a concert to 3,000 people. And I'm standing next to my friend John, and we literally opened the first box of t-shirts. And so I'm seeing it for the first time. I'm kind of like a proud dad. And John's standing next to me, and we hold up the first shirt, and he says, "Man, this is great. Would it be okay if I wore this on stage?" And I just play it really cool and go, "Yeah." And so he puts on this To Write Love in Her Arms t-shirt and goes out, and Switchfoot plays their show, plays their set, and halfway through, between songs, he just mentions it. He says, "Hey, a buddy of mine is working on a project. It's new. It's called To Write Love in Her Arms, and you can find it on the internet." And you're thinking, man, that's very kind. That's very gracious. And I was just honestly thinking, that's a crappy plug. Because the internet is a large place. And I felt like, he had to narrow it down. It'd be like if I met a girl and I wanted to stay in touch, maybe get coffee, and I just said, "I'm Jamie. I live in America." It's not good. Like, you have to offer more, right? And so I felt like it was this blown opportunity, and we didn't have a table set up. We didn't get to explain. We didn't get to give out the MySpace address. And I had a 3-hour drive home that night, and I, late that night, sat down at the computer and checked the MySpace, if you remember that phrase. And there were all these messages. Kind of all of this leading up to the heart of the matter. There were messages and friend requests and comments from people that had been in the room, people that had been at the concert, people saying that the story we were telling was their story. maybe it was their dad's story, maybe it was their girlfriend's story, maybe it was a cousin or a classmate or a neighbor. We heard from people the first night who talked about what it was to live with the pain of losing a loved one to suicide. And we heard from people the first night who admitted that suicide was something they had thought about as an option in their life. I heard from people who talked about depression, whether they used that word or not. And some of the ones who didn't use that word, they just painted a picture of how life looked or how it felt. And we heard people say, hey, it's really hard to get out of bed right now. It's tough to fall asleep at night. It's rare that I finish a meal. When I'm back home, when I'm around my mom, she keeps asking if I'm okay. She says that I don't smile like I used to, and she asks if I'm okay. My friend Chad plays the drums in Switchfoot, and he wore the shirt the next night at a show in North Florida, and more messages came in from people we hadn't met. People wrote in on behalf of loved ones and said, there's someone that I care about, I want to help them, but I don't know how. There's someone that I love, and I'm trying to help, but it doesn't seem to be working. It almost seems to be hurting, and they push me away. And I'm afraid I'm going to lose them. Do you have any advice? And as you can imagine, there was a couple of emotions, there was a couple of feelings. First, just the surprise that, oh my gosh, what is happening? That we were bumping into a much bigger story. And there was a sense of privilege in that, there was a sense of excitement, and then there was also this other feeling of oh my God, I'm in so far over my head. Like, I'm not qualified to answer these questions, I'm not even qualified to read these messages. And so to the second, I just began to try to start doing some homework to be able to point people in good directions, to try to point people to treatment centers and crisis hotlines and books and other websites and just resources where people who were thinking about taking a step or trying to help someone take a step could be referred. And maybe this thing could be something like a bridge to help. This common thread began to emerge where a lot of people said, this is part of my story that nobody knows. This is a question that I've never asked. This is something I've never said out loud. And so with that, there was this feeling that people were taking a first step, beginning to go there, or beginning to open up, or beginning to be honest for the first time, maybe ever. And I was, for some reason, comfortable with just a few responses, just as a human being writing back to another human being. And I felt like it was important to thank people for their message, for their story, for their question, to try to tell people that it was brave of them to send that message, to ask that question, to tell people that their story mattered, to tell people that they weren't alone in whatever their situation was. They weren't alone. And it was amazing it was almost like people were hearing that for the first time. It was almost like some of these people were encountering hope somehow for the first time. And a lot of them, they didn't need my words because they were finding encouragement in each other's words. These comments were starting to stack up on the blog and on the homepage, and people realizing that what they were in the middle of, someone else was in the middle of it as well. And what they had been through, whether it was an experience of loss or how addiction had touched their family, there were other people that had lived it or were living it. And so people, I think, began to feel less alone. And I ended up giving back my early job, and if them hiring me at 22 was kind of shocking for a lot of people, I think me quitting at 26 to run a MySpace page was equally shocking. And a lot of people didn't get it, like a lot of people didn't understand, and rightfully so. But I think how I was processing it was, you know what, there's going to be a line a mile long of people that not only want that early job, but they'll probably do it a lot better than me. And then over here was this other thing. It was hard to explain, it was hard to define, it was brand new, but it felt really unique, and it felt really special, and it felt like there was a lot at stake, and it felt a lot bigger than me. And it felt like it mattered, and it felt like there was purpose.